In 2004, 19-year-old Galina Khrom was looking forward to her graduation. But the girl didn't have a dress she could wear to the event. She dreamed of a beautiful evening gown, just like all her peers. There was very little time left before the long-awaited celebration, so Galina decided to earn some extra money. She got a job as a saleswoman at a market stall in one of Voronezh's markets. One day, during a work shift, Galina took a free moment to talk with her mother. She stepped out onto the pavilion porch and, absorbed in conversation, didn't notice the intense gaze of a young man. It was Yuriy, her boss's son. He didn't dare approach her right away, even though he was very interested in her. But in the following days, he eagerly asked the saleswomen from the neighboring pavilions about who this girl was and whether she had a boyfriend. After getting all the information he needed, the guy started visiting Galina several times during each shift. He already knew exactly which days she worked, and after meeting her, he persistently tried to win her over. However, the girl was reluctant to make contact and rejected his advances. She complained to her colleagues about Yuriy's visits. Being modest, Galina felt awkward every time she noticed him heading toward her pavilion. One day he came and handed her a velvet box. Such boxes are usually given with jewelry. And sure enough, on the white satin fabric lay a chain with a pendant. Yuriy asked the girl to accept the gift and invited her to dinner at a cafe. He had already realized more than once that Galina's heart was hard to win, but this time he did not expect a firm refusal. The girl didn't need gifts in vain. She looked at the gold jewelry with a bad feeling and thought that her mother would hardly approve of such a relationship. After receiving a negative answer, Yuriy walked away and, turning back, shouted to Galina that she would still regret her decision. That same day, the girl tragically died. One of the women working at the market noticed that despite the break being over, Galina's pavilion doors were still closed. When several of her colleagues managed to get inside, they were met with a horrifying sight. The half-naked body of the young saleswoman was lying on the floor. There were marks of strangulation and several stab wounds on her neck. The lowered skirt indicated that the girl had been assaulted. The day's earnings were also stolen from the kiosk. The first suspect, of course, was Galina's ardent admirer, Yuriy Antonenko. He had just uttered a sinister phrase before parting ways with the girl. Maybe at that moment the guy was actually planning his crime. No, nothing like that was planned, objected Yuriy, who had returned from fishing during the interrogation. And all she should have regretted was not accepting the gifts. No matter how dubious his confessions seemed to the police officers, they still had to believe him. After all, while Yuriy was still under close scrutiny by the investigators, new bodies appeared. In one of the apartments of a residential building in the Pridonskoy district, a mother and daughter were found dead. It seems that 33-year-old Tatyana Fedosieva and 10-year-old Sasha became victims of the same maniac who took the life of Galina Khrom. Both the woman and the child had ligature marks on their necks. The girl was assaulted. In addition, the jewelry that was kept in the apartment disappeared, along with other valuables and money. The lock on the front door was not damaged, which clearly indicated whoever he was. Tatyana let the guest in herself. She divorced her husband long ago. He didn't even visit her and their daughter, so his name was immediately crossed off the list of suspects. After the divorce, the woman kept her distance from men, worked as a teacher, and devoted all her free time to Sasha, while also remembering to call her mother. There was a special strong bond between them. The only man who came to the Fedosiev's apartment was the massage therapist Yevgeny Klinsky. He gave the girl therapeutic massage sessions, which her poor health required. He was never accused of harassment. On the contrary, he showed more fatherly feelings towards Sasha and even shed a tear when he learned that she and her mother were dead. Of course, they couldn't just take Klinsky at his word, so the investigators went to the market where Galina Khrom worked and showed the vendors a photo of the mysterious masseur. It turned out that the young man really was a regular customer at the market and often stopped by to see Galina. Many pieces of this puzzle had already fallen into place. All that was left was to take the suspect's biological material for examination and compare it with the biological material found on the victims' bodies. That's where the case started to crack. The data didn't match. Moreover, as it turned out later, Klinsky was completely indifferent to women. In matters of love, he was more interested in men. Thus, the masseur was also excluded from the list of potential suspects in the deaths of the 3 women from Volgograd. The next suspect in the murder of the Fedosivs was the electrician Sergei Rasolov. He came to their apartment, accompanied by the building supervisor. After this visit, Tatiana, as usual, called her mother. Something about this man who was checking the meters made her feel uneasy. It was not coincidental. Sergei had a violent temper. After his hand reached for the bottle, he couldn't stop anymore. He would get drunk and immediately become aggressive. When Rasolov was called in for questioning, it turned out that he had only been in the Fedosivs' apartment once. Moreover, at the time of his visit to the police, the hot-tempered electrician was planning to marry a woman he had met only recently. For this, he even started treatment in order to begin a new life, untainted by his dark past. Soon, he was also removed from the list of suspects. Thus, so far, none of the men mentioned in this story turned out to be the Pridonskoy maniac. New light was shed on the complicated case by 2 citizens, Safonova and Bondareva. Both of them were attacked by an unknown man who tried to assault them, threatened them with a screwdriver, and stole their jewelry. He ambushed Safonova late in the evening in the city park, led her into a basement, and started tearing off her clothes. He did the same thing with Bondareva, but she managed to escape. 2 workers who were walking along the same path where the stranger grabbed her scared him off. Both victims remembered some features of the man's appearance well, and it was not hard to guess that he was a former convict. They paid special attention to his hands, rough and coarse. On the back of his hand, one of them had a tattoo of a rising sun on his fingers, the other had blackened nails. It was clear to the investigators that these attacks were committed by the very criminal they had been searching for all this time. For a long time, the man with the unusual tattoo did not come to the attention of the police. It seemed unclear how Tatiana Fedosiva, who generally kept her distance from men, voluntarily let an ex-convict into her apartment. That means this person must have been someone she knew well. Besides the masseur and the electrician who had been ruled out as suspects, there was still a man who hadn't even been included on the list before. This was Tatiana's neighbor on the landing, Alexander Kil. Investigators quickly found all the information about him. Kil was born in 1968 in Kazakhstan and lived there with his parents until he turned 24. Then they moved to Voronezh. He had been convicted several times, first for robbery, then for assaulting a convent novice. For the second crime, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. However, after just 2 years and 2 months, he was released for good behavior. This fact alone indicated that Kil could very well have been involved in the series of crimes, and the next 2 facts perhaps finally made everything clear. First of all, his hands matched exactly the description given by the last 2 victims. Secondly, Kil's biological material matched the material found on the bodies of the victims. It was also discovered how exactly he managed to gain the trust of his victims. In the case of Galina Khrom, everything happened naturally. Kil came to the market and saw the girl come out of the kiosk to pour out water from a bucket. Setting himself the goal of making easy money, he approached Galina with an innocent question. What time is it? Did the girl lean over? The clock was under the counter? At that moment, Kil grabbed the towel hanging on the hook and threw it over the saleswoman's neck. He visited Tatiana Fedosiva under the pretext that someone was supposedly calling him all the time and asking for the teacher. He really wanted to get to know his lonely neighbor, and Tatiana invited him in for a cup of coffee. The terrible incident occurred in the kitchen. Kil waited until she turned her back, then threw the belt from his own robe around her neck. After Tatiana died, he decided to take a tour of the other rooms. That's how he met 10-year-old Sasha. She was sleeping peacefully in her bed and woke up from the careful touch of a stranger. Sasha got scared and cried for her mom, but Kil's questions hung in the air. Where is the money? Where are the jewels? The uninvited guest's commanding tone frightened the girl greatly, and she revealed everything to him. The maniac took all the valuables, but fearing that little Sasha would give him away, he knocked her to the floor. First, he assaulted her, and then he used the rope belt. At the homes of Alexander Khiel's two lovers, one 27 and the other 45 years old, investigators found belongings belonging to the victims, the 27-year-old and the 45-year-old. Investigators found Fedosiva's audio-video equipment and Safonova's gold earrings belonging to the victims. By the way, the ladies of his heart knew about each other, and Khiel tried to please both of them with original gifts. He used the stolen money to buy himself new clothes. Why the Pridonskoy maniac committed all these crimes he couldn't really explain, but it was clear to the investigators. He was driven not only by the desire for profit but also to satisfy his physiological needs. Khiel's mistresses admitted that sexually he was insatiable. The maniac eventually made an excuse for his actions. Voices in his head forced him to commit the murders. He even tried to fake insanity. At times, he behaved inappropriately, and once he opened up to the investigators during a conversation. He claimed that he used to work as a personal gardener for the former president of the Republic of Kazakhstan, Nursultan Nazarbayev. Of course, it was hard to believe that. The results of the forensic examination contradicted his feigned madness. Khiel was found to be sane during the investigative experiments. The maniac, grinning, said, "You can't imagine what a pleasure it is to take someone's life." It's impossible to say for sure what fostered such cruelty in this man. Presumably, it was his mother's overly strict upbringing. She was domineering in his childhood and never let him breathe easy. Little Sasha couldn't even watch television without her permission. For a long time, she told him what to do at every step, and he remained weak-willed and cowardly. Alexander Khiel was sentenced to life imprisonment and ordered to pay the victims' families 450,000 rubles each. However, no amount of money will bring back their daughters to the parents, who now live in eternal mourning. Galina Khrom, the maniac's first victim, was buried in a luxurious dress, as if fulfilling the young girl's dream of a beautiful outfit she never got to wear at her long-awaited graduation. July 19, 2005, the city of Dedovsk, in the Istra district of the Moscow region. A clear summer day, a serene blue sky without a single cloud, the sun generously pouring its rays onto the intertwining streets, basking in its light. Adults are busy with their own affairs. Elderly folk stroll leisurely through the flowering alleys. Three boys set out for another walk, one that promises to bring them a lot of joyful experiences. Mikhail Yelshin is 12, his brother Alexander is 10, and their friend Pavel Sokolov is 11. The boys' starting point was the dormitory at the local textile factory, and their destination was a pond where they wanted to swim. Naturally, the boys aren't thinking about anything bad. All they see ahead are fun and a full vacation planned for the rest of their holidays. Then school will start, and there won't be any time left for fun. But on that day, which marked the height of summer, something bad happened. It made it clear that they would never sit at their desks again. When the boys were already heading home, having had plenty of fun and treated themselves to ice cream in cups along Pridonskoy highway, an unexpected new companion joined them. He was a young guy, about 19 or 20 years old, pleasant looking, but completely unfamiliar. He offered the boys a ride to the train station in his car. He said, "Why walk when you can have a breezy ride?" The boys agreed, looking forward to an interesting journey. However, on the way, the stranger suddenly turned toward his dacha, which was located in a gardening cooperative with the simple name Polyanka, and soon it will become clear why. When the car stopped, Mikhail found himself not in the back seat, but in the trunk. It was the driver who forced him in there. To deal with the rest of the guys, he needed to deprive them of the opportunity to leave the car. Unable to resist or stand up for his peers, Misha, left for dessert, listened in horror as Sasha and Pavlik were cold-bloodedly strangled one by one with a shirt. He himself didn't have long to live either, because the very next day the maniac, it's fair to call him that now, took him to the village of Lushki and at dawn strangled him with a shoelace near the village cemetery. The bodies of all three were discovered at the end of July or the beginning of August of that same year, 2005. The corpses appeared to be severely mutilated. Leaves were used as a means of superficial camouflage. These horrific discoveries, although they disturbed the public, did not help the investigation identify the perpetrator, and as a result the case was put on hold for a full 4 years. In 2009, in one of Moscow's forest areas, not far from the ill-fated clearing we already know about, the body of a girl was found. The person who took the schoolgirl's life covered her body with a car seat and a suitcase, possibly to make it harder to find the corpse. She was 14. The circumstances of the killing this time almost immediately became the focus of the investigation. It was found out that the last phone call the deceased had was with Alexei Sergeyevich Kruglov, her mother's brother, her uncle. In addition, it was established that on that very day, Kruglov took time off from work, mentioning the disappearance of his niece, which was a strange coincidence. Fortunately, the worried uncle was detained very soon. And then the most interesting thing happened. The suspect sincerely confessed not only to this crime, but also to several others, including the brutal murder of 3 boys, which had long been forgotten. As for the latest attack, here are the details. Kruglov offered to walk his niece Anya to school. The unsuspecting girl agreed, and a few moments later, she was strangled with a cord. This entire nightmare unfolded in the Istra district on Sharikopodshipnikovaya Street. Soon, details of the very first crime committed by Kruglov surfaced. It happened in August 2003 in a summer house. The victim was also a child. And before you find out what happened next, like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss new strange and scary stories. Also, subscribe to the Strashnoti Telegram channel. There's a completely different format with tons of content and a unique atmosphere. Entry is not allowed for the faint of heart, but if you're not afraid, the link is below the video. His name was Pedya. Apparently Pedya was a friend of Anya, the very niece of Dushegub who died at his hands 6 years later. That's why it was normal for the boy to sometimes stay at his friend's house. He was 9 years old. On that August day, the maniac brought unsuspecting Petya to his home. When the boy was calmly sitting on the bed, Kruglov sneaked up from behind, threw a clothesline around his neck and began ruthlessly strangling him until the lifeless body of his victim lay sprawled on the blanket. A few moments later, it was taken to the forest and left there near a railway tunnel located around the 47th kilometer of the Snegiri-Manikina section. This was Alexei Kruglov's first crime. He disguised himself well, despite being fully aware of his actions. He desperately tried to cover up the traces of the crime and did everything he could to avoid criminal responsibility. That's why he was so quick and skillful in getting rid of the body. As for this particular case, after Kruglov was exposed, Petya's mother, Natalia Vladimirovna, spoke at one of the court hearings. She confirmed the information that on August 17, 2003, her son was at the dacha. 9 days later, she was informed that the boy hadn't stayed at his grandmother's house the previous night. Natalia, unable to hold back her tears, briefly described the situation. I went there immediately after I found out about it. We started asking all the neighbors. My mother was looking for the child at night, shouting, calling out. Then some man came out of Kruglov's yard and, rudely interrupting her, told her not to make a fuss and to go home as soon as possible. The culprit himself couldn't say anything clear about it, he just said a couple of phrases. When the search for Petya began, it was me, my sister and her husband. I knew the boy. Actually, I didn't allow Anka to bring friends over when there were no adults around. They were always shouting and I really didn't like that. As for whether Kruglov saw the child on the day of the crime on the 25th, he also said rather distantly, "Well, I don't know. I can't say for sure." The search began when we were already getting ready to go home. I found out about it when the police arrived. No more clear explanations. Fortunately, that's where Kruglov's descriptions of atrocities end, but it's worth saying a few more words about his life outside of criminal activity. The future maniac was born on March 8, 1986 in Moscow, where he later lived. He received a secondary specialized education and worked as an auto mechanic at a Kia Motor Service Center. No other details about his childhood and youth are known. It's also not entirely clear why he started taking lives. As for the motive that guided the sadist, it is hypothetically believed to be the pleasure he derived from taking lives and causing suffering. Why did he choose children as his victims? Innocent, pure, who in theory had done nothing to offend the proud egomaniac. Maybe because he could only hurt the defenseless, or he counted on their naivety, which made all these murders possible. Here's another question that anyone who has learned about Kruglov's story is sure to ask. As a result of the forensic psychiatric examinations, it became clear that the perpetrator was aware of the social danger of his actions, and Alexei Kruglov was found sane. Before the first hearing, he tried to cut his own throat. This happened right in the convoy vehicle on the way from the detention center. But to Kruglov's disappointment, the doctors managed to save him, and the tormentor from Istra sat in the defendant's seat with his neck bandaged. He listened to the charges completely calmly, as if they had nothing to do with him at all. He felt no urgency to repent or seek forgiveness. Later, there were 3 more suicide attempts, which were also unsuccessful. The doctors described such aggressive actions by the maniac towards himself as demonstrative. It is quite likely that they were caused by the same obsessive desire to avoid responsibility and public condemnation, which was coming at the strangler from all sides. In 2010, at a court hearing, Kruglov suddenly stated that he had nothing to do with the crimes that occurred in 2003 and 2005, and indeed the crimes of 2003 were considered not fully proven. But in the incidents related to 2005 and 2009, the court unconditionally found Alexei guilty. It is still unclear whether there was a sexual aspect to these crimes. The court noted that Kruglov only strangled the children and no elements of abuse were observed. Regardless of how true this fact is guilt, and the punishment for the cruel criminal was life imprisonment. Now he is close to 40 and he is still spending his days within the cold walls of the prison. And the Polyanka Gardening Association is still shrouded in grim and at the same time sad memories of the 5 children whose lives were taken there. On May 25, 2003, 2 11th grade students from school number 44 in the city of Kopeisk, Oksana Kuzina and Elena Smogina, were returning home from their graduation party. The last bell had rung earlier that morning, and that meant that ahead of the girls were not only eventful summer holidays, but also the significant beginning of a new stage in their adult lives. The girls are relaxing, twilight in strangers' windows, the pale lights of lamps stood still. The friends were eagerly discussing their plans for the coming days, preparing for entrance exams at the local university, and recalling the events of the cheerful celebration that had ended just an hour ago. Suddenly, an unknown man blocked the graduates' path, asking the woman if she wanted to get acquainted. He asked them, and a strange smile flashed across his face. Oksana and Yelena didn't want to get involved with a stranger, so after politely refusing his advances, they walked on. The man suddenly moved from his spot and like a whirlwind rushed at the girls. 2 strong blows to the head knocked Oksana off her feet, and another blow sent Yelena to the ground. The stranger didn't stop there. Since the strong blows to the head left the victim in a dazed state, he could now handle both of them without any trouble. First, the man dragged the girls into the bushes, then, without much thought, began to deliver even more vicious blows with full force. He hit their faces, heads, stomachs, and arms. After the beating, he undressed Oksana and assaulted her. Then he did the same to her companion. Then the maniac took their lives by asphyxiation. For this, he used improvised means, the strap from Oksana's purse and the strap from Olena's school apron. Later, the 2 bodies of the unfortunate girls would be discovered on the grounds of a kindergarten. One would be lying not far from the sandbox, and the other would be hanging upside down from a thick tree branch. It would also turn out that on that fateful evening, local residents heard heart-wrenching screams but did not take any action. Who cares if it was the final bell? Teens have fun and party, and fights are common at these events. As they say, anything can happen. After Oksana and Elena didn't come home, their parents raised the alarm, and in the morning of May 26th, they went to the police. They were told that a search could only be organized 3 days after the girls disappeared, but the bodies were easily found that very morning. Children who were playing nearby. The bodies had suffered such terrible injuries that during the funeral they were carefully covered from the mothers. The killing of the schoolgirls instantly shocked all of Kopeisk. People started contacting the police, drawing attention to any suspicious person. However, the real criminal could not be found. Once, a suspicious man was detained, but he turned out to be unrelated to the crime. Perhaps this story would have gradually faded into oblivion if it weren't for another gruesome attack that happened 3 months later. On September 18th, a young woman was returning from work. Her route took her along Railway Street. When she turned the corner of a residential building and started heading toward the nearby alley, she was suddenly struck on the head with a fist. The victim began to scream loudly, which probably made the attacker doubt his own strength. This time, the local residents, specifically 2 guys, reacted instantly. They immediately called the police. By the time the officers arrived, the woman who had been screaming was already dead. She was beaten and then killed by asphyxiation. When the police arrived at the crime scene, they were met with a horrifying sight. Naked legs with fresh injuries were sticking out of the bushes. The victim's body was disfigured and there was a patterned mark from a rope on her neck. Next to him lay a cassette of the band Mirage. Nature seemed to pay no attention to what had happened. From the grass came the melodic chirping of a grasshopper. A gentle whisper of wind rolled over the leaves, but amid the usual sounds there was another, more suspicious crackling of dry branches. Someone appeared to be tangled in the tree branches. The officers sensed something was wrong, but they didn't have to puzzle over what they heard for long. Very soon they noticed a man hiding in the tree. He didn't manage to escape before the police arrived, so he had to play hide and seek right at the scene of the crime. The captured Vyacheslav Yaikov, 27 years old, quickly confessed to 6 crimes. The killing committed on September 18th, the killing of 2 graduates on May 25th, and 3 others. All of them just as brutal and varied in the ways he tortured his victims. Later, he shared all the details of the atrocities he committed. Yaikov's involvement in the last murder was confirmed by his fingerprints on that very Mirage band cassette. After his arrest, details about Yaikov's previous crimes surfaced. The beginning of his criminal record was marked by a murder in October 2002. It happened at a gas station. Yaikov knocked the woman down with several blows to the head, which was not difficult since she was intoxicated. Later, this very method of establishing control over defenseless victims became his signature move. Then he took her life by asphyxiation. Her body was found in a ravine. Her underwear was pulled down and her chest and abdomen were exposed. The next crime took place on the night of May 1st, 2003. Under Yakov's hot hand, another young, slightly drunk girl got caught. The struggle between the maniac and the victim in one of the garage cooperatives didn't last long. Soon Dushegu strangled the girl and took her life with a cord he always carried in his pocket. The partially naked body was found in the bushes on Pobedi Avenue. The girl's mouth was stuffed with all kinds of trash, such as syringe wrappers and cigarette packs. As Yaikov later clarified, he did this because before the kiss, he was embarrassed by the strong smell of alcohol coming from her mouth. 3 weeks later, the criminal went out on the streets of Kopeisk again with the intention of taking someone's life. This time, he acted a little differently. He offered a drink to a woman he didn't know. She gladly agreed and fell into the maniac's trap. The drink triggered a deadly mechanism in Yaikov's mind. He beat his drinking companion with particular cruelty and killed her using a clothesline. The victim's body was also partially undressed. It was found in an abandoned lot. There is a theory that the maniac was a necrophile and had sexual intercourse with his victims when they were already dead. At the same time, he often used various objects that happened to be at hand. Here is what is known about the life of the Kopeisk maniac. Vyacheslav Viktorovich Yaikov was born on March 1, 1974 in the Kyrgyz Soviet Socialist Republic in the village of Pridonskoy. He and his mother moved to the Chelyabinsk region in 2002. In his childhood, Yaikov was diagnosed with oligophrenia and treated in psychiatric clinics multiple times. When Yaikov was 13, his father passed away, which also had a negative impact on the boy's condition. As a teenager, he started engaging in petty theft, took things from home, and began to be rude to his mother frequently. At school, he was described as an unbalanced, hot-tempered, and aggressive child. In a fit of rage, Yaikov could bang his head against the wall and cut himself with glass. In Kyrgyzstan, he was prosecuted for selling illegal substances, but was released from criminal liability due to his mental condition. The punishment for the young drug dealer was undergoing rehabilitation in a clinic. In his homeland, Yaikov married an intellectually disabled woman. Their family life was quite peaceful. The newlyweds managed the household and took care of the garden. However, after Yakov moved to Russia, his wife never followed him. The issue with illegal substances got in the way. In the city of Kopeisk, Yakov worked as a laborer. This was his main occupation, and his favorite pastime in his free time was taking lives. His mother also kept busy, working at a bread kiosk, not far from where, incidentally, the crimes were committed. Vyacheslav Yakov was found guilty of all the murders. The conclusion of the first examination indicated that he had strayed from the righteous path due to insanity. Several such examinations were conducted, and as a result of each, it was determined that the maniac was not aware of the danger of his own actions. In court, he cried and said that he did not want to take the lives of his victims. He only wanted to bring them to a calm state of mind. The women who knew Yakov from work told investigators that he constantly complained about loneliness and the lack of female attention. The maniac himself tried to convey roughly the same idea to the investigators. He said that he longed to make contact with girls, but they were reluctant to approach him. And then a mix of anger, resentment, and clouded judgment would bear its fruit. After Yakov's victims reached that very desired balanced state, he admitted that he passionately kissed them. Although no biological traces could be found either on the victims' bodies or nearby. Nevertheless, in addition to mental disorder, a sexual motive was also cited for the crimes, as indicated by the specific actions performed on the bodies of the deceased. In February 2005, the Chelyabinsk Regional Court ordered the maniac to be sent for compulsory treatment in a specialized psychiatric hospital, where he remains to this day. He is now 47 years old and does not communicate with anyone except his 70-year-old mother. Vera Ivanovna Yakova has repeatedly insisted on a review of the criminal case, being convinced that her son is not guilty. According to her, Vyacheslav was non-confrontational and well-liked by his colleagues at work. Nevertheless, Vera Ivanovna pointed out the main flaw in her son's character. He doesn't have his own opinion, he's easily led, compliant, and always does whatever he's told because he's not capable of critical thinking. His speech is also rather poorly developed. Yakov's mother has firmly believed for 18 years that her beloved Slava could not have treated those women so cruelly. And in her opinion, there is little evidence of his involvement in these crimes. He's not aggressive, he cries a lot, says that he was intimidated and constantly threatened, blackmailed with the idea that I would have problems, admits Vera Ivanovna. And after all, he has no one but me. In 2002 January, a 25-year-old girl named Tatiana came from Minsk to Moscow. On one of the frosty winter days, a young man approached her and asked what was the reason for her sad mood. He suggested getting acquainted, and then, on a cheerful note, apparently to lift her spirits, added, "It's my birthday today." Apparently this phrase made a magical impression on the girl. And after a while, the talkative birthday boy settled not just anywhere, but directly in Tatiana's apartment in the building located on Leningradsky Avenue. However, this visit did not end with a festive feast, but with the robbery of the trusting Minsk woman and the taking of her life by strangulation. Several valuable items were stolen. The girl's body was discovered on January 18th. She was bound with a ligature mark on her neck. In March 2003, 22-year-old Svetlana also came to Moscow, but from Omsk, to visit her relatives. The girl practiced oriental dancing and had many plans for her life. For example, she dreamed of working as a hairdresser, but then her cousin Ira intervened in her dreams and suggested working with a dance group, performing at different venues. Full of enthusiasm, Svetlana liked this idea, and her love for the new craft gradually grew. She was earning a decent amount of money, part of which she sent to her parents. Her personal life was going great too. The young woman started dating a well-off guy, and after receiving their parents' blessing, they were even planning to get married. Life was showing Svetlana only its brightest sides, but one day a car stopped in front of her on the street, and some stranger offered to give her a ride home. The bride-to-be agreed, thereby crossing out all hopes for a wedding in the near future. The driver turned off the planned route and cold-bloodedly dealt with the girl. He assaulted her and then strangled her with a scarf. A few days later, in one of the Moscow apartments, the mother of 20-year-old Yekaterina began to worry when she realized her daughter was late at work. The bad feeling turned out to be completely justified. The girl's body was found in a wooded area. She had been killed almost the same way as the previous victims. First, she was assaulted, then strangled. In April 2003, walking the streets of Moscow is increasingly dangerous. Another body has joined the 3 previously found corpses. It was discovered on Matros Zhelezniak Boulevard in a rented apartment. The victim, 34-year-old Natalia, came from Novosibirsk and apparently also could not resist the charms of the mysterious ladies' man wandering the Moscow alleys in search of women. Natalia was strangled. It became clear that this was the maniac's preferred method of killing, and the investigators would have to deal with him again. Around the same time, another gruesome discovery was made in the city park, the body of a policeman's wife. As it would later turn out, she and her husband had an argument during a car ride. It was so bad that the woman, unable to take it anymore, had to get out of the car and walk along the side of the road, not knowing where she was going. That's when she got caught. The maniac gained the trust of the woman, who was searching for understanding at that moment, and carried out his intentions. If the unfortunate woman had listened to her husband's pleas to come back, she would have survived, of course. July 2003. 2 28-year-old bodies were found simultaneously. They were also strangled, one with a rope, the other with a belt. One of the bodies was found on the grounds of the botanical garden. The crimes were committed on the 1st and the 4th, with only a 3-day break on July 21st. One of the Muscovites, Lydia, a 43-year-old alcoholic with a long history, was walking slowly down a city street, and full bottles were clinking in her bag. Suddenly, a reproachful voice of a stranger sounded, "Isn't that a bit much for you alone?" The woman was not known for being greedy, so she gladly invited the man to her place, and why not have a drink together? But the guest responded to Lydia's good intentions in a way she did not expect at all. He dealt with her, and when her son Anton came home, he was 13, the boy was faced with a terrifying sight. The criminal also finished him off, getting rid of an extra witness. Anton's body was found hanging from an interior door. And before you find out what happens next, like this video, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss any new strange and scary stories. Also, subscribe to the Strashnody Telegram channel. The format is completely different, with vast content and a unique vibe. Entry is not allowed for the faint of heart, but if you're not afraid, the link is below the video. Soon, terrifying rumors about a maniac spread throughout the city. Despite this, law enforcement agencies did not consider it necessary to raise the alarm, since, in their opinion, the crimes were not connected to each other. Moreover, for some unknown reason, the attacks on women stopped. At the same time, a certain 25-year-old Vladimir Mirgorod was sentenced by the Preobrazhensky court to 6 years in a penal colony for assault and robbery. The girl who suffered from the indecent acts of Mirgorod and his friend did not remain silent and directly reported her offenders to the police. In January 2005, Mirgorod was sentenced by the Preobrazhensky district court to 6 years of imprisonment. He was not suspected of a series of brutal crimes with fatal outcomes, even though after his arrest, such crimes stopped in the north and northwest of Moscow. In July 2010, the maniac was released. During one of his regular visits to the district police officer, he casually let slip that he had committed more serious offenses, namely taking lives. This confession alerted the investigator. They started paying more attention to Mirgorod. Very soon, an astonishing fact was discovered. His fingerprints matched those found at the crime scenes from the period between 2002 and 2004. The person who had kept all of Moscow in fear for 2 years was found. It's unclear how many more women and girls would have suffered if the maniac hadn't exposed himself through his own carelessness. At the same time, it's worth noting that in most cases, Mirgorod still managed to skillfully cover his tracks and outsmart the police officers, who weren't particularly proactive to begin with. As it turned out, Vladimir was actually glad that his secret had finally come to light. He passionately wanted to be exposed so he could free himself from his inner torment. Confirmation of his guilt in the committed crimes did not take long to arrive. However, he confessed to only 8 episodes, and the investigators had to remind him of just as many other murders. Mirgorod's involvement in the atrocities was proven thanks to DNA analysis. It turned out that, in order to take the lives of the unfortunate girls, he used various improvised means. A bathrobe belt, a lady's purse strap, a scarf, and electric wire, such a versatile set of tools. After the new detention and arrest of the former convict, it became necessary to study his biography. Vladimir Viktorovich Mirgorod was born in Moscow on November 1, 1979. He lived with his family in the Tymyryazevsky district, specifically near the Petrovsko-Razumovskaya metro station. His father worked as a builder and his mother was an accountant. Contrary to all the arguments that maniacs grow up in unfavorable family environments where their parents constantly humiliate them, the circumstances here were completely different. Vova's parents surrounded him with love and care since he was the only child in the family. While studying at school, the future maniac achieved success and was always striving for something new. And after finishing his studies, he entered the Institute of Steel and Alloys. He was supposed to become an engineer, but he never did, because already in his second year, he dropped out and took up another trade. He delivered cargo. The money he earned, he spent on gifts for girls whom he skillfully charmed. In addition, it became known that he had a girlfriend. A photo of Mirgorod, where he is standing shirtless with a languid, seductive look, still graces one of the dating websites. And everything would be fine, if only you didn't know the terrible secret that the main character of this photo had been hiding for 2 years. Everyone around knew Vladimir as a well-mannered, intellectually developed, cheerful and sociable guy. In short, he was known as the life of the party and one of the guys. Naturally, after the shocking details about the murder and Mirgorod being labeled a maniac, none of his acquaintances could believe it. In one interview, Mirgorod, smiling broadly, revealed the motive behind his crimes. He killed because he saw no reason to restrain himself and because no one stopped him. When asked about contacting his victims, he casually said, "I just approached and introduced myself. They sometimes approached me themselves. We had a drink, without any aggression." Then it's not a complete blackout, more like a fog, you know? I didn't even remember some of the victims because everything mostly happened in the dark in the evenings. In his own words, he didn't feel any remorse and his restorative therapy was a calm and long sleep. When committing his crimes, fear was the last thing on the maniac's mind. Taking a life in his eyes was a completely ordinary event. "This doesn't go against human nature in any way," explained Mirgorod. "People take each other's lives both literally and figuratively. Just watch television." He only partially repented for his crimes, but he never asked the victims' relatives for forgiveness. The Strangler, as Mirgorod later came to be called, was found sane, and on January 30, 2012, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. The first place where the Strangler was held was the Black Berkut colony in the Sverdlovsk region, and then he was transferred to another colony with the harmless-sounding name of Snezinka in the Khabarovsk region. Maniac profile, victim's portrait. Which of you is familiar with the meaning of these terms? As a rule, future maniacs show themselves even in childhood, and that was the case I'll tell you about today. Is it possible to identify a maniac already in childhood? Will it be a child prone to cruel behavior and aggression, who shows himself at school and terrorizes his family, or the opposite? Is it the quiet, withdrawn classmate that no one talks to? There is no definite answer. The anti-hero of today's story revealed his true nature even in childhood. His parents were frequent visitors to the school principal's office, and at home, behind closed doors, his sister was regularly beaten and attacked by him. The execution of the family pet should have been a troubling warning sign for his parents. As a very young boy, out of curiosity, or perhaps even then for pleasure, he killed his own dog by hanging it. It was not possible to find out whether he was punished for this, since there are no witnesses left from those distant years. But he never felt any guilt or remorse for what he did as a child, or for what he did as an adult.
Grandmothers used to say that he killed his dog because the dog loved his sister more. That is, sometimes he would even kill his sister.
The distant year 2000. In small towns, not everyone has a color television yet, and radio and newspapers are the main sources of information. The events took place in the city of Gryazy, Lipetsk region. A young girl named Virginia was returning home late in the evening. At 19, her life was just beginning. Her parents helped in any way they could. Friends were there for her not only when there was something to celebrate. Her boyfriend surrounded her with care and attention. By late September, darkness falls early. Buses, as they usually do, were delayed at all times and didn't run on schedule. Perhaps this was the very reason why a life that was just beginning to gain momentum was cut short. Virginia, or rather what was left of her, was found in a field in October of that same year. The charred remains were barely identified. According to the investigation, the girl was still alive when the fire completely engulfed the haystack. The girl's parents and loved ones will not find out anytime soon who ended the life of Virginia Bruntseva. June 2002, Inessa Bykova was also returning home late along the Lipetsk-Griasy highway. She decided to hitchhike. After all, 15 to 20 kilometers on foot is doable, but still quite a long distance. She would only be found in 2004 when her relatives raised the alarm about the missing girl. By the way, I'll leave additional materials about this case in the Strashnodi Telegram channel. The link is under the video. In a pile of garbage at the abandoned limestone plant's stone crushers, remains will be found showing signs of unnatural and very gruesome death. Just like that, Inessa ended up in the wrong place with the wrong people and paid with her life. New year, new life. Zoya Roshchina was celebrating this 2003 New Year in the pleasant company of friends. There was food, there was drink, and there was a roof over their heads. The woman didn't want anything more. Zoya kept one or two terrible secrets for knowing which she had paid with her life. On January 2nd, 2003, her frozen body was found in a deserted area of the Gryazinski district. As a result of the autopsy, a high concentration of alcohol was found in her blood. The investigation suggested that the woman was simply careless, misjudging the amount of alcohol and the distance to her home. Despite the fact that 3 years had passed since the maniac began his activity, law enforcement, based on the materials they had, still could not connect all these deaths into a series. March 2003. In the Petrovsky district of the Tambov region, a body covered with snow was found on the side of the road, showing signs of beating and blows from a heavy blunt object. It was 46-year-old Sergei Konev. In the records of what was then still the militia, he was listed as someone who had once served time for selling and possessing illegal substances. After a brief investigation, detectives found out that Sergei had returned to using those same illegal substances after serving his sentence. This then became the basis for the version of what happened. He had some kind of conflict with people like himself and ended up owing money to a dealer, and his end, though sad, was quite predictable. Just a few days later, in the Dobrinsky district of the Lipetsk region, the body of 66-year-old Valentina Raldugina was found with similar marks on her body and under similar circumstances. On the roadside, covered with snow, with signs of beating and blows from a heavy blunt object, she was found just about 10 kilometers from the nearest settlement. Despite clear similarities, the investigation failed to connect these two cases as a series due to various reasons. Two murders with similar methods happened too far apart from each other. One could have assumed that the perpetrator was using a car, but no one involved in these cases thought of that. And the maniac, who had already taken the lives of 5 people, took a break from his activity for almost 2 years, cutting off any chance of being caught. 2 years later, in December 2005, 32-year-old Valentina Medvedeva was found frozen to death at the Mater Reservoir. Before her death, the woman was heavily intoxicated. The mystery for the investigators was how the woman ended up at the reservoir. Being in such an intoxicated state, there was no way she could have gotten there on her own. There were no abandoned vehicles nearby. It became obvious that someone had brought her there and deliberately left her to freeze. But why? What could an ordinary average woman from a small town have done? Questioning acquaintances and neighbors was fruitless. No one knew Valentina's whereabouts or company on the day she died. And once again there was silence, this time for 5 years. April 2010 shocked the small town with a terrible event. The body of another girl was found. They couldn't identify her even after catching the maniac who committed the terrible atrocity against the one the locals called Snegurochka. The body was found not far from the Matira River. Before her death, her head was shaved bald and a blue New Year's cap, traditionally worn by those playing the role of Snegurochka, was put on her head. Multiple stab wounds and the body was burned. The police hadn't seen anything like this in a long time. Even the most seasoned investigators later said they felt a mix of pity for the unknown girl and rage toward the person who did this to her. November 2011 became the final chapter for this story. In the forest belt between the city of Gryazi and the village of Nizhny Tyryulyuy, the body of a local homeless man, well known to many in the city, Alexander Shkatov, was found. The man, who was homeless, made a living by doing odd jobs as a handyman for the local residents. He would put up fences, fetch water, or chop firewood for various people. The reform was complete and the militia was now the police. A lot had changed in life over those long 11 years, but no one could have imagined that a whole series of brutal murders would be uncovered. Questioning the witnesses pointed to the house of the last person whom Alexander Shkatov had helped. It was Viktor Sotnikov, a local resident. Viktor made a living by producing and selling moonshine, although according to his neighbors and acquaintances, he wasn't much of a drinker himself. He resided with his wife Svetlana and their 3 kids in a house. Because of his line of work, he was quite popular among the locals. Almost every other neighbor would come to Sotnikov's house to buy homemade alcohol. During the interrogations, Viktor and Svetlana quickly confessed. Svetlana talked about the killing of Snegurochka, which she had also told her own brother about. After that, Svetlana's brother hanged himself. But the investigation was unable to link this incident to the actions of the maniac. There simply wasn't any physical evidence. A little later, the investigation brought in Alexander Lenshin, Sotnikov's peer and friend. It turned out that they had committed some of the murders together. So who was the maniac? Viktor Sotnikov was known for his cruelty and aggressive behavior even as a child. Constant beatings and abuse of his sister and parents were normal behavior for him. He himself told investigators that when he was just a boy he strangled his dog because it was more attached to his sister. Whether he was punished for this is unknown. There are no witnesses left from those years. In his youth, he was twice accused by 2 different women of assault, and the police have records of this, but the cases were closed because the victims withdrew their statements. As Sotnikov commented, he bought his way out by selling his house. He simply paid one of the women and she withdrew her statement. He moved into half of his father's house and used the remaining money to buy a Volga car, which he also had to sell a little later, and buy a cheaper car. To pay off the second charge, in the year 2000 the future Satana was already making moonshine and working as a private cab driver on the side. He met Virginia Bruntseva at a bus stop and offered her a ride. According to him, during the ride the girl agreed to come over to his place where she had a drink and they got into an argument.
I don't remember the details, but I was overcome with rage.
The girl's mother strongly disagreed with this. Her daughter didn't have a habit of drinking alcohol, even among friends, let alone with a stranger. Besides, Virginia was about to get married soon. She believed that Viktor had forced Virginia into the house, where he beat her until she lost consciousness. After that, he took her out to a field, laid her on a haystack and set it on fire. One version contradicted the other, but what was clear was that Sotnikov Viktor gave a confession that he had taken her life. In connection with the death of another victim, Inessa Bykova, Alexander Lenshin was brought in for questioning. He and Viktor were driving home and saw a girl hitchhiking on the road. No one took her home. Instead, the car headed toward the Matira River. Lenshin said that his friend suggested the girl have intimate relations, but she refused and he beat her with a metal rod. He forced Alexander himself to stab her several times in the chest, which caused her death. After that, they tried to drown the body, but for some reason they couldn't do it. Then they took Inessa's body to the territory of the Zvezdkovi plant, where they left it in one of the pits, covering it with trash beforehand.
And they covered everything with trash.
As already known, her body was found only in 2004, almost 2 years after her death. Zoya Roshchina was also deprived of life by Sotnikov together with Lenshin. She, like Lenshin, lived for some time at Victor's house and knew about the 2 previous crimes. Out of fear of being caught, Sotnikov suggested to his slightly drunk friend that they take Zoya far away from the city, to which he agreed. Together, they put the already quite drunk and sleeping Zoya into the Volga and drove her out of the city. They had no doubt about the success of their plan or their impunity. Around New Year's, anything can happen. That's exactly what happened. Zoya Roshchina's death was considered an accident, and the incident did not receive much publicity. When neighbors and acquaintances asked Sotnikov where his housekeeper had gone, he replied that she had gone to live with her mother-in-law. The killing of Sergei Kornev and Valentina Raldugina, which happened just a few days apart, was also committed by the men together. Sergei asked to be given a ride to Tambov for a small fee. On the way, Lenshin, for unknown reasons, hit Sergei multiple times, first with his fists and then a sledgehammer. They abandoned the snow-covered body on the roadside. Alexander said that they took the life of Valentin Raldugin in the same way. A woman came to them asking to take her to the Dobrinsky district. On the way, she was beaten with fists and a sledgehammer, and her body was left on the roadside. That was the last killing in which Alexander Lenshin assisted Valentin Medvedev in 2005. Sotnikov invited him to his home. Later, he promised to take her to Lipetsk, where the woman lived, but instead he got her drunk, took her out of town and left her in the snow to freeze. Satan explained the 5-year break by saying that he was going through a difficult period in his personal life. His partner, Valentina, managed to escape from him on her 4th attempt. She had been regularly beaten and several times Victor had forcibly brought her back. After Sotnikov was taken into custody, she was listed as missing. There was a theory that, knowing about the crimes, she had shared the fate of her partner's victims, but she was found safe and sound in Tambov, where she had fled from the tyrant, possibly saving her own life in the process. In 2008, Sotnikov began living with a 25-year-old woman named Svetlana. One day, she came to his house for some moonshine, after which she was seen by acquaintances and relatives, including her 5-year-old son. Only after she had already become pregnant and agreed to marry Sotnikov.
And what do you mean I didn't leave the house? He wouldn't let me go, he didn't want me to go out, and at first he would show up and threaten me. He threatened me.
During their marriage, Svetlana had a son and a daughter 2 years later. From Svetlana's testimony, it became clear that she and Sotnikov's previous partner used to go to the psychiatric clinic to get medication for her husband's partner. The murderer was registered with a psychiatrist and did not refuse to take medication, but he disliked going to the doctor so much that he made his women go there for him. In 2010, Snegurochka, who had terrified the city, came to their home together with Victor. Right in front of Svetlana, Victor undressed and shaved the girl's head, then put a New Year's cap on her. The maniac put his wife and the girl in the car, took them to the Matera River, where he first stabbed and then burned the unknown girl. In 2011, the last victim was Alexander Shkatov. Victor invited him home to help prepare firewood. A quarrel broke out between the men, but it quickly died down. Alexander thought there were no hard feelings left, so he agreed to the suggestion to go pick up Svetlana in Nizhny Telalyuy. On the way, Sotnikov beat him to death with a metal ball and dumped the body in the forest belt. Like any maniac in court, he tried to pretend to be insane, but it didn't work. The journalists didn't stay away. They pressed Victor's neighbors, relatives, and acquaintances. For such a small town, it was an event that would remain in people's minds for many years. The townspeople were unaware that a maniac lived among them, but the neighbors suspected it. The neighbor from the street, Tatiana, told journalists, "Sometimes you're walking home with bags, and if someone offers, 'Tanya, let me give you a ride,' oh God forbid, I know that means straight to the cemetery."
Yes, his wife. I honestly don't know how his wife lived with him. The first one, Valia, I lived with her for a long time. I don't know about the second one.
And also about how Victor would often hint at his tendencies in his jokes. Valentina Churilova from Gryazy recounted her father telling Sotnikov about his recent 85th birthday. Sotnikov replied, "Oh, so it's time for you to die, Uncle Petya. You've lived long enough. That's enough." Another neighbor claims that Sotnikov chased 2 of her acquaintances with an axe. At the same time, the townspeople not only didn't try to draw the attention of law enforcement to their neighbor, but also allowed their children to play near his house. The hill was conveniently located for sledding in winter. Sotnikov would often go there, joking around and pushing sleds. In the summer, he played soccer with the children on the same hill. Shortly after the arrest, Sotnikov's house was burned down by a group of unknown people, and his neighbors who lived in the other half miraculously survived but were left homeless. Svetlana was released and not involved in the case. Soon after, before the fire, she left with her kids, not disclosing her destination to anyone. The official causes of the fire were never named. It is only known that it was done by a group of people. According to the locals, it was done by the relatives of the deceased. Others are convinced that there was no one to take revenge, since almost all of Satan's victims had no relatives or close ones. Only the mother of Virginia Bruntseva filed a claim for moral damages, and no one at all showed up for the sentencing. Another reason was that local drunks simply came to the moonshiner's abandoned house for leftovers, and the fire happened due to carelessness. One of the neighbors said that the day before the fire he saw Sotnikov's former partner Valentina in the city and near the house, but this version remained just a rumor. According to the lawyer, a psychiatric evaluation was carried out, and as a result both Sotnikov and Lenshin were found to be mentally healthy. Experts noted that both defendants had issues with aggression. Sotnikov's issues began in childhood, while Lenshin's resulted from alcohol abuse. Despite their mental disorders, they maintained control over their actions. Sotnikov disagreed with the experts' conclusions, considering himself inadequate. According to him, he took people's lives because he was having hallucinations. He believed the victims were cultists and wanted to cleanse the world of the unworthy.
No one would hire him. Suddenly you go wild. Beasts turn into beasts. Someone might send you off somewhere to do some dirty work and you go wild. And then it starts, a flash, rage.
Sotnikov insisted on a second psychiatric evaluation, but he was refused. On October 22, 2013, Sotnikov and Lenshin were convicted. Sotnikov received a life sentence, and Lenshin was sentenced to 19 years in prison. In his final statement, Sotnikov expressed regret and repentance for how things turned out. He apologized and said he loves and respects his wife, who did the right thing by turning him in to prevent something worse from happening.
I deeply ask everyone for forgiveness for what I have done. But I understand that my apology can't change anything. You can't bring people back.
Then he sent his regards to his children. "I won't repeat this again," added the convict, expressing hope for a possible pardon in 25 years. Now Sotnikov is 61 years old. He is serving his sentence in the Black Dolphin colony in Soliletsk.